All right, everyone. It is a new series that we're starting on Nexus Wargaming that we're calling Competitive Corner. And I think it is name pending. I haven't thought up anything better at this point, but I thought it was pretty appropriate to set up um, to get people who are interested in competitive play. And I'm aptly naming it Competitive Corner. um, I want to say just right up front that competitive OPR is not for everybody. So if you're listening to this and you aren't particularly interested in competitive play, I mean, you can certainly stay and continue to listen to it. But I mean, this is not for you. You know, if you don't like competitive play, you know, this sort of content may be not be interesting for you. But if you are interested in competitive play, like myself and my guests, hey, listen, get some good information, some good thoughts on competitive play. We've got myself and three other people that will let them introduce themselves. All of them are tournament organizers. All of them are pretty accomplished players. All of them, I've spoken with all of them separately. All of them have a pretty good understanding of the game. So just an opportunity to sort of have some different competitive perspectives kind of go into this. So with that in mind, let's just introduce myself. You know, hey, you know, I'm Dan. I'm you know, I run Nexus Wargaming. Been playing war games about 30 years. I think that 2024 will mark my 30th anniversary playing war games.
Right.
So 30 years in wargaming. Um, Played 40K off and on. I played really up to the sixth edition. Sixth edition sort of killed me, and then I really haven't played. I've tried the new editions of 40K, but then I found one page rules and I love the game. And I love that although OPR itself doesn't push the competitive side, it is a game that there is a lot of opportunity for competitive play. So yeah, that's something that, especially this year in 2024, I'm trying to focus on the channel. So that's myself. Let's introduce Ryne. Ryne, how you doing, man?
Doing good, doing good. I'm Ryan. I'm one of the competitive organizers here in Dallas. I've been playing war games since I was, I guess you could say, five. Started out with Space Hulk, and then worked my way up to different historical games and whatnot. I've also been in the Dallas local fighting game community for the tournaments there. Whenever I think of competitive play, I try to take all different aspects from different war games I've played and different fighting games I play, and implement them to make something. I guess you can say balanced as well as competitive.
Yeah. And so also we'll post all these links in the description. Ryan is the admin for the Dallas Fort Worth OPR scene. So if you're in that area, get a hold of him. I went up there and played in a tournament, hung out. Super cool guy, super smart as well. He's like myself, comes from the Kings of War side of things. So yeah. All right. Thanks, Ryan. Devious.
Yeah, hello. My name is D3vious. I technically run two YouTube channels. One is mostly about gaming, specifically Final Fantasy 14. The other one I just started and I'm doing battle reports. Haven't done any OPR yet. I'm getting the feeling that I'm kind of the young buck in the room when it comes to wargaming because I've only really been playing for about 5-ish years on and off, only really getting into it seriously in the past two. But I am also my group's or my D&D group's power gamer that always breaks the system. So I like big numbers.
That's good. Yeah.
Haven't really done any tournament organizing, but I participated in a few tournaments and I've consistently gotten to the semifinals, which is a bit frustrating. And I am currently rebuilding the Jackals army from the ground up.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. And yeah, we'll post the link in your YouTube channels as well about that. And I think it's great. You know, I love the idea when I heard that Devious you're starting a YouTube channel and going to be featuring some OPR. content, I'm like, yeah, let's advertise it. There's any person who can do OPR content. There's such a void that it's just, I think it's great. Yeah, and just so Devious as well. Kudos to Devious because we played in the one page more tournament. And you did pretty good in that, right?
Yeah, so I've played in technically one tournament and a league that
Yeah.
another guy in the OPM chat organized. I played the Jackals both times. I got to the semifinals in the OPM tournament. I got beat out by Adam, who was running a regen spam Eternals swarm with a lot of flesh eaters, robot legions army. It's the super cheese list that you hear about with the freaking, I think it's 4-up regen before it got nerfed. That was frustrating. And then the league, I went completely undefeated all the way up until just before the semifinals, where I would have had to fight this, I think it's like Battle Brothers or Prime Brothers list with a 1,000-point tank that had 15 XP. I decided I didn't want to lose most of my army, so I forfeited that one. Still got to move on because I was undefeated up until that point. Fought a custodian list with, you guessed it, heavy shields and regen, and could not scratch the paint on anything but their tank.
Yeah, jackals are, it's impressive. Jackals are I know I never played jackals. I know that but I looked at the jackals army and I was like, yeah. But so that's pretty
Honestly,
impressive.
it really feels like you're fighting with wet noodles half of the time, but I'm very good at picking my fights and positioning and just scaring the bejesus out of my opponent. Like I'm a living aggro button, is what I like to say.
Good.
So what I usually do is just use my beast riders to position properly and snipe out individual units. But they kind of didn't work so well when they got nerfed in 3.2 to where they could only take one different weapon option and they had no AP. That was a little spooky, but they got fixed recently. So yay, I guess.
Yeah. Okay. And Magister, how you doing, man?
Doing all right. Thanks for having me on. So I am I'm currently playing OPR with a group of people in Southern California. We recently started the SoCal OPR Discord, and we've got a bunch of members on there trying to organize games. Personally, I started playing Warhammer in 3rd and 4th edition a long time ago, put it down for about 20 years, played 20 years of competitive Magic the Gathering in the meantime, and the other event sort of organizer and rules committee guy in our group is somebody who I work at a small indie board game company. I forgot to mention this, called Mythweaver Games, and we make pick up and play role playing games. And so we kind of decided to take our design chops and apply them to working towards something like a standardized competitive rules framework for OPR so that we could do more tournaments.
That's awesome. And it's really good to have you on, Magister, Ryne, especially because you are tournament organizers. I think me and D3vious are more on the player side. And it's going to be really interesting because one, I think all of us feel that OPR, let's specifically just focus on Grimdark Future. I think we could talk the other games, but just Grimdark Future especially, I think all of us feel that there's a lot going on there that I think it really has a lot of there's a lot of opportunity to make this a really competitive game. The question is that in this first kind of conversation, how do we sort of do that? But before we get into that, I think one thing that we've heard that I think some really great news is OPR is going to be sponsoring their first tournament in Birmingham, England. If you guys don't know, Andy over at Spymaster Gaming, he's going to be hosting that, which I think is great. Him and the countercharge guy, Ed. And it's really great because I think we've all been in OPR enough to know that the owner has historically said he's just not interested in competitive play. I know I've heard that from him directly, where I was like, I think sometimes I've posted on the Discords some competitive, like, hey, here's some competitive things, and he's just like, oh, thanks, but we're not really good at doing competitive.
Mhm.
He's not interested, which is fine. But
Always
I
been
think
mine.
it's great that maybe he's changing his mind about that, which is, I think, is wonderful. When we start talking about competitive play, so the first thing that I think has to be asked is, a casual player, I think, who's not interested in competitive play would say, wait, OPR has a competitive rule set, like a competitive rules tournament rule set. And they also have these official tournaments. So maybe everyone just give a quick answer. Why do we need anything more? Why can't we use the official armies? Why can't we use the competitive rule set from OPR? And just jump in here. I'll open the doors.
I think I think the official rule set, competitive rule set from OPR is a good starting point. But as I play more games, I find that there are certain aspects or certain scenarios that room for leave room for question, if that makes sense. For example, we talk about terrain and how terrain can make or break a matchup. And the official rules for OPR have, a suggested way to set up terrain and how to define terrain. But I find that a lot of people don't officially use that. We'll have some people who want to play terrain. They want to play terrain randomized, or they want to play terrain with a set board. But this can leave different problems in balancing. It can leave some armies open to getting destroyed by others. And so I think again, to reiterate, I think that the competitive format for OPR is a good starting point, but we need to add some more for balance purposes to help everybody out, play whatever army they want to play in various scenarios.
Yeah, I think there's probably three reasons why we need to do more than just what's been given to us. Number one is the lack of consensus about basic things like line of sight and movement and what to do with models with no base. Like, you need basic standardization for these sorts of practices, just moving and shooting. And the second one is that and so when we wrote our errata, we actually just went to the Warhammer 10th edition rules and we just copied a lot of it because it's very clear and it's very coherent. And the second thing is that the kind of mission scenarios feel very random and very casually, like they don't feel like they have a competitive tooth to them. And the third thing is that the armies are just deeply imbalanced in the final analysis right now.
Yep.
I think you said it better than I did, but that's basically what I was trying to say.
Yeah, that's good. Okay. D3vious, what's your sort of thoughts on that?
Honestly, I haven't had too much in the way of issues with like rules wording or anything like that. All of the OPR that I played has been online, so we usually just kind of pick a map for a tournament round, and that's just sort of the map that we play on that day. And a lot of the ones that you see on Tabletop Simulator are actually really, really well designed. So I haven't really had the experience of like setting up a map for a competitive match, but I can definitely see where that could be awkward in some cases, because it really feels like there's bare minimum suggestions, even not really rules on how to set up a map.
Yeah, I mean, and so for myself, I think that, so one, even the competitive, to just even, I think there are some clear imbalances. That's my take on it, that there are some just very clear imbalances in the armies. And for me, it's that some armies just, I feel when I just look at them, have just been given a lot more care, love, and attention than others. And yeah, and so that's one thing. The other thing is the competitive rule set for OPR is actually like to bring allies in for a competitive, it's just opening up the game to just all sorts of shenanigans. If some of the armies are already powerful, to just take some of these armies and then take some casters with some different spells from a different army, I mean, it just starts to get absolutely just like like the amount of balance in the game is just so just wide ranging. Um, I did some competitive testing with Sam last year, and we brought allies, and we very quickly realized that allies should not be part of any sort of competitive scene. It's just it turns bonkers really fast here. Okay, so with that in mind, let's sort of so I think we're all hitting on something. Let's talk about thing one, the need for the following. So I'll kind of custom armies. So this has been my big thing about custom armies. I have been sort of really in the custom army space lately, just trying to work on custom armies because this is my general view is that I've seen people post a lot of feedback about specific armies on the Discord for OPR, and I I just think that that doesn't seem to be the focus. So for me, I'm a big point about actually having a like I would love for the competitive scene to actually have some sort of agreed upon custom armies for all the major factions. And that a tournament organizer could just go there. Now, if they want to add or subtract from factions, they could. But just for a tournament organizer to be able to go to a list of factions with army lists and say, okay, these have been sort of vetted or tweaked, and that at this point as well, these competitive balanced armies are also constantly being tweaked. I think that coming from the OPR, and I'm not here to crit like again the OPR or the OPA, and I would say Gaetano, but I don't know who is really making all the decisions here. I call it the OPR company. I know that Gaetano has specifically said he's interested in he only wants to tweak the armies when they actually create models for them. And that's a sort of hearing that he's not going to really dig into these armies until he creates models for them. I mean,
That's concerning.
well, it's if you're a competitive player, it is. I mean, yeah, it's like okay, well, you know, when
That's Games Workshop level.
well,
Thank you.
and it's for me, it's fine. I think it's, but it's not. And I can understand where he's coming from. He doesn't want to take up what I think it's going to take to be competitive, which is a lot of testing, a lot of going back and forth, a lot of feedback. So I can understand him, but that's my thing. I think there has to be custom armies that just I don't think even that the OPR has the resources. They don't like to even do that. So yeah, that's my kind of feel on custom armies.
This is my dream, actually. So when I encountered your content and I saw, oh, somebody wants to make standards for competitive lists, that is like, that was the solution to a conversation that our group organizers were having 2 weeks ago, where we were like, listen, we have this army maker tool. That's part of what OPR is. You can make custom armies. Armies are imbalanced. This is how we solve the problem. And everybody kind of sat around and was like, well, isn't that just going to lead to everybody making these bizarre min-maxed builds for everything? And that's going to open this Pandora's box that we don't really want to go down, because that's going to change the nature of what the game is. And when you showed up with this content, I said, guys, what if we just say these lists that none of us are making are allowed? And that way it's an external standardized source for us that none of us can tweak or mess with to fit our personal preferences.
Yeah, well, that is, I mean, it's really good to hear that because that's exactly where I want it to be. And I'll kind of say it over and over again. I'm not saying that these lists are perfect. These lists need playtesting, these lists need everything. But I'm hoping that this can be the start of here we get some lists out there, feedback and all this, and let's get these lists where they need to be. Yeah, yeah. Ryan, how's it been over there as far as your tournament scene and sort of?
So, and as far as my tournament scene, when I implement when I implement rules for tournaments, I try to implement ways to give everybody a fair opportunity. And I think we can talk about that a little bit later, but I want to get to your point on custom armies. I'll be honest, at first, I wasn't so sure where you were going with custom armies for competitive play. Because one of the first things, or one of my main concerns, and I think this is a concern for a lot of people, is balancing it out and allowing an army to basically be broken. But I see your point now where it would be a more controlled aspect. And I think it would actually be better to balance it out. And I think that the way it should be done is to have, let's say that we start off with 3 lists. These lists aren't called like Battle Brothers or Orc Marauders or anything like that. They would just be called, list 1 would be Elite List. And the Elite List would have units with high defense, high quality, different rules to make them, really hit hard, but maybe point it out so that they're less. So I guess what I'm saying is that we'd have lists that incorporate a different aspect or different thought behind making an army, whether it's elite, fast, horde, or ambushy. And at that point, your miniatures are just the skin for them, if that makes sense.
It's interesting.
And it's a lot like how the ramp pit games play. In that, yeah, you would, maybe you'd have, if you pick the horde style, you can use that for your alien hive or for your orc marauders, or anything that would implement a horde play style, but they're playing the same. You're just, it's easier to balance that way, is what I would say.
Okay, fair enough. What about you, D3vious?
I am once again the odd man out here. I don't think custom armies are necessarily the answer to getting a more competitive experience. But that also kind of goes along with some issues I have with OPA and the way he runs things in general. I think custom armies are incredibly important for the community, though, because like you have people that are doing Helldiver themed armies against arachnids from Starship Troopers. That's freaking cool, and it makes really good content that a lot of people are going to enjoy. So I think custom armies are crucial for the long-term vitality of the game. I don't think that's how we get a more balanced competitive experience, though. I think that has to come from like the team itself and how they balance the armies.
Yeah, I mean, I would say this. I would love it to be the ideal with you, D3vious. I mean, I think that I would love if the OPA invested the and I don't know of their reasons, and I'm not here to. I'm saying that, of course, in an ideal world, I think that the OPA really working to make their armies really balanced from a competitive standpoint. That'd be great. I don't. Everything I've heard from Gaetano, and I don't know where he again. I don't. That's just I hear what he says. Is that he's not really interested in pushing the competitive, and he also, I think in his last call, he really does feel that the armies are balanced as is, which is I don't I just have to like fundamentally disagree with that.
Yeah, he's just objectively incorrect, and I'm willing to, and I have fought him about it.
And so like what can I would say it this way, he for whatever reason, good or bad, and so 2 things. One, he doesn't seem interested in, and I can almost understand where he's coming from because to balance armies, it is I think that if we did, this is my thought, if we did the custom army route, we would have to, like, it couldn't just be, like you said, the Wild West of just some of the stuff you can do. You really would have to build these armies, test them. Oh, this is a little too powerful. Okay, let's nerf this and tweak this in here today. And it is going to be a process. I think that the armies that I created, I tried to create them as A-tier armies, but I like openly admit they could be too powerful or not powerful enough for here. I just don't think the OPA wants to do that. I don't think that, and I don't know.
I think you're going the right direction. I think so it's going to be up to the tournament organizers on whether they want to use custom armies or not. And I think that whether you decide to use the custom armies or use the official armies, you need to implement different standards to balance each one. So if you want to do official armies, that's fine, but you need to balance out secondary objectives. You need to balance out the mission types, the terrain types, so that every single army has a fair advantage against the other. It's all up to the skills of the player, not the army list itself. But if you wanted to go the custom army route, again, if we just had a set of like 3, 4, 5 different lists that implement a stereotype on what you would see for an army, whether it's fast, elite, et cetera, I think it might be a little bit easier to balance everything out in the long run. But it's just, that's the thing. It's going to take a while to get that done. And, it doesn't stop people from, if they want to use these custom, I'm just going to say the elite list, right? The elite list, if they want to use that custom list for just pick-me-up games, that totally works too. We can use we can start it out. We have the tools to get it started with the point calculator, and then we just tweak it from there. But I think you're going the right route. I definitely agree. It's going to take some time to do, but it may be a little bit easier to balance in terms of competitive play.
I think I might go another direction with it, because what I've liked a lot about the lists I've seen on Nexus Wargaming is that they are not rehauls of the armies exactly. Like, he very much starts with, here's what this army is already trying to do. We're going to make certain tweaks to bring it up to a competitive standard, but it's not like we're tearing down everything that's there. We're just altering it slightly so that way it's more competitive. And so I could see a world where you do allied lists, but the only ally list you're allowed to use is the standard list, and then here's a secondary list of like, these are units that you can add that augment, that fix perceived imbalance issues with them. And I think that keeps things very close to the standard that we already have in OPR, and also keeps it in line with frankly, with the Warhammer 40K aesthetic, which is what all of this is really about anyway. And I know my group would like to keep it kind of on that track.
Yeah, I go back and forth about allies, like having an allies specific army where like maybe there's some general units. I go back and forth about it, but it's definitely been something. And I completely agree with what Magister says. For me, I think what you said about keeping it in the 40K aesthetic, as it's going to be more work, and this is just my 2 cents on the matter. I do think that these armies should echo 40K, because that is how you're really going to grow. And I think I don't know. I know that's sort of an additional complexity to add to it, but 40K is the 500-pound gorilla in the room, and I don't know. I take this, and this is I can understand how people get this wrong or right. There's different opinions on this. I come down on the opinion of we should be trying to reach these 40K players, offer that hand to them, really try and make that army really close. Now I can understand people would disagree. That's my sort of fall down on that.
I disagree. I understand where you're coming from. We want to maybe keep it close to 40K, and that definitely helps 40K players transfer over, or entice them to start playing OPR. But in terms, I think that I think that the official army lists that exist and the way that OPR is already does that itself. It already entices those 40K players over. I think if we open up a competitive format, and especially if we do these custom rules where it's just generic, custom army lists where it's just the generic horde, whatever, that is the next step from OPR itself, to competitive play. I don't know. I think it will naturally happen if we go the route with custom armies and we don't stick them to what 40K is. We just have them be generic, whatever. Because again, OPR itself with the official list already kind of does, what you were saying for us. It just gets, those 40K players in, and then if they choose to follow the competitive format, they can, follow it from there.
Okay. Fair enough.
Personal hot take on that idea. I really, really dislike the concept of generic armies. For me, at least, that takes the whole flavor out of the game, which is half of the fun for me.
And
Like,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I know I'm a unique case here. I am basically on a crusade to get the Jackals up to A tier just through sheer brute force. I have never not played Jackals. I've also only lost 5 total matches since I started playing OPR.
Hey, Jackals, when you play them right, I've seen them. They can be really nasty. So
Against
I
certain
feel,
armies, yes. They fall apart against super elite lists.
but going
That
back to what your point here, I think what I would counteract, if you don't mind, you're saying that, it's displeasing to you because it takes away the flavor of your army, which I can understand. But I think if we're going to talk about competitive formats, we are going to sacrifice flavor for balance.
Hmm.
That's just my personal take. We have to find the perfect balance, and I get it. Flavor does make the things, the games fun, but I think that should be reserved for competitive tournaments that want to use the official lists. If we're looking for like a higher, an even more competitive format with everything balanced out, we're definitely gonna sacrifice that. We have to sacrifice some of that flavor for more balanced armies, more balanced play styles.
I'm not disagreeing that would definitely be more efficient. It would definitely work balance wise. But thinking of the 40K side, especially, and even
Yeah.
within OPR, there's a lot of faction loyalty. Like, there's a lot of people who just really enjoy playing a faction because
Sure.
that's their faction. It's fine tuned to the way that they've kind of evolved to play. So, just for an example, you could give me an ambush hit and run army, and I would probably not do as well with it, just because it's different from what I usually play. So unless you're focused purely on the competitive side, it's going to feel awkward swapping over for a tournament.
That said, I think that what Ryne, it's funny. You're kind of opening up a thought about maybe this is actually a different tournament format that Ryne is, where it almost feels a little more like on the chess side or like a
Right.
board game almost, where in other words, I don't think what we're talking is really necessarily mutually exclusive. Maybe that's the great thing about OPR. Maybe we could actually see some sort of competitive, almost a board game slash chess is where there are these standard 4 factions, and then it's a lot more balanced. And maybe some people really like that, and maybe there's other people who want to sort of. And that's the great thing about the competitive. Like that's why I got you guys here to say, hey, here's some different with a custom army builder and everything, there's so much opportunity for people to bring out the competitive play. I think that there's some people who could like that, and there's other people who may like to make this sort of what I consider to be 40K, but just balanced.
So, and And it kind of goes back to what I was saying before, is that I think we're going to have different, in terms of competitive formats, we're going to have different types of competitive formats, is what I imagine. And I'll be honest, I do like finding a competitive format that works with the official list, because as was mentioned, I do love my armies, right? I love my orcs, right? I want to play my orcs. And so I think there should, when we talk about the schools of thoughts of different types of way of competitive, we should have a format for those official armies to keep that flavor. But if we want to get really, like, as you said, more balanced, more board game-ish, then we may, need to go that route of having the generic lists, and then building out from there, building up from there. And I think it's going to be up to the tournament organizers on which route they want to go. You do not there's no right or wrong answer here for competitive OPR. I think, we need to throw out these ideas, and we need to, have them evolve naturally, and see what works as more people are trying a competitive format, and adopt them as we see fit, and change them if we see problems with them.
Yeah, I think
agree with that.
that's a really interesting format idea, having just 3 or 4 like really balanced factions, kind of like StarCraft. That's really cool. But that's actually just like a different game than I think what at least what we're talking about in SoCal, which is we want to live the 40K scenario. We want to have that fantasy. We want Grimdark. Like we rename all of our units in our army builder to the 40K names. I mean, that's just what we do. And so, so I was upset, like this Custodes thing, when he split the custodian destroyers into single man units. It's like, well, what am I going to do with my 3-man squad? Like so like these are things that are problems for me.
Yeah.
So, and for the people, that's just speaking on behalf of my group, but like that's what we want to do. And so I think I really like the solution to like look at the standard that OPR is doing, which they are very, transparently trying to emulate 40K, and just making the tweaks that need to be tweaked to bring the armies up to not merely like the same competitive standard, because that's not my only concern. Is like we want to meet the same aesthetic standard. Actually, we want to bring our 40K models to the table.
Yeah,
But I
totally
like
fair point.
Yeah, and I think that, but Ryne, like I said, you even just talking about this actually makes me more excited to try this board gamey sort of standard. Like I want to do. I'm basically I'm in Magister's camp and D3vious, but now I actually want to try this now, which is great. So no, that's awesome. That's awesome. Let's get into some erratas and rule sets. So, because this was one of our questions we got talking about, how do you deal with it? Especially this is going for Ryne and Magister. How do you deal with things like, I mean, what are some really good things um that a tournament pack needs? Okay, so here's what OPR presents. What are some things that's really sort of needed to sort of really help a new tournament organizer not sort of start from scratch, right? Like, hey, here are some really good rulings that just work that you can just give to your players beforehand. And a tournament organizer isn't getting basically bombarded with the same question, 50 different times. So like Magister, what are some things, and I'll post your tournament pack in the description. What are some things that you've really answered in your tournament pack?
Initially, we actually had to rewrite errata for all of the special rules because interactions between things like Furious and Blast were just not at all clear. And so I'm so glad that in 3.3, a lot of that language has been addressed and our tournament pack shrunk a lot, which is great. But the main things that remain are what is a standard way to move, to use line of sight. Flying actually had to be heavily sort of errated to make it clear how things even move. We put in a rule that said if you physically cannot place your model somewhere, you can't place your model there. Just like things where people would just do weird things given the ambiguities of the core rules. And then so just like basic, how do you move and shoot and see things? But the thing that we would want next is I would love to see map layouts and standardized mission types that aren't super complicated, just things like, very small tweaks, like, okay, these particular points are worth 2 to your enemy and 1 to you, and they're arranged in this way. So like kind of more like standard Warhammer type missions, because those in our testing of different scenarios like that, uh, they've been very difficult to balance, even simple changes. So we would love to see more of that kind of
And
preparation. Because
yeah, and I was going to say too, just for those who's never been in a tournament, the reason that Magister has to do these sorts of things is that in casual play, rolling a 4 up or this sort of here, it's not a big deal. But when you're in a tournament and whenever people are making decisions and they don't want to tell their opponent, there just really has to be that clarity there. There really does. Yeah, Brian, I'll let you kind of pick up there.
Oh, no, one of the first things that I had to do before they introduced a similar system in the third edition was working with line of sight. Um, you know, tank in the old ruling, we did line to line, but a unit of infantry could block a line of sight from a tank, and it kind of didn't make sense for people. This was me leaning more on the narrative aspect. So one of the things I had to do early on was create a height system, much like Kings of War, based on wounds. But then in the new edition, they implemented a similar system with line to line. When I start my tournament packet, I answer questions that are ambiguous. So I explain how I expect line of sight to be worked, how I expect terrain to work, so that there's no questions on that. And I also implement a system of secondary objectives in an attempt to balance everything out. And the way that I do that is the secondary objectives that I write will punish you if so that how I do it is I select about 6 or 8 different secondary objectives that you can pick every single match. You can't pick the same one in on your next match throughout the tournament, but you can pick from one of them every single match there. And some of these secondary objectives are meant to punish certain people who bring spammy lists. So if someone wants to bring a walker list with a bunch of tough 12 models, I may have a secondary objective saying, hey, for every model of tough 6 or higher that you destroy, you get a victory point, so on and so forth. And so to reiterate, when you're trying to make up a competitive format for your local group, be direct to answer any questions people may have. Tell them how you expect line of sight to work. Tell them how you expect army composition to work, how terrain should work, and start throwing in different things in the attempt to balance all types of armies, such as those secondary objectives that I've mentioned.
Yeah, I think that's good. I'll just add on I haven't run a tournament, but me and Sam and my own self, I've played a lot of OPR, a lot of it. And I know for myself, I actually got this from a 40K player. He talked about, hey, we need to run some points. So command points. And at first I was like, okay, I'll do it for you just to make you feel better. I want you to play. But actually, after playing that game and a couple of other games, I really liked implementing command points just to sort of help balance out some really bad. If it's high level competitive play, obviously dice are part of the game, but some simple command points that can sort of it can help sort of even out some of those spikes. I think I really liked it. I don't know. I may be tweaking things with 3.3. I'm reevaluating whether I want to keep the unwavering for some of mine. I need to do a fresh set of 3.3 testing here, but that is something that I've found generally about 8 to 10 command points for a 3,000 point game. It's not a lot, but just enough to sort of help that, because OPR, it is one of those games that with only 4 turns, if you have that really bad roll on the first turn to get a waiver or something, it really can snowball pretty fast here. So that was my little addendum to that. So we're gonna I think we're gonna talk about scenarios next time. I think we had a really good conversation here. So we got some user questions, and we're just gonna close out here. There's some couple of questions that I'd like to kind of everyone. We don't have to spend a lot of time on them, and if you don't want to answer them, that's fine. First thing I think we got recently is just everyone. How do you guys think that 3.3 is going to affect the meta? So this is just a guess. For myself, I'll say that I think undead. I think that robot legions are probably back in the meta as maybe the best army. I think the undead changes. I think the undead changes basically losing wounds on a 1 or 2 now. Boy, I think that's actually probably going to be the biggest factor in 3.3 is the undead changes. I think that robot legions, especially, or I think that they maybe just be back to their normal dominance. So that's something that I'm guessing at this point. Yeah.
Um, I I think that we're gonna see I think that yeah, we're gonna see an increase in robot legions, but I liked how they did the rending to kind of counter that. To be honest, I'm not sure how. I don't think I know enough, or I've played enough games to kind of see how the game's going to go. I will say, I don't know if we have time to talk about it now, with the changes to morale, Shaken, and the assault. I think that we are going to see an increase in biker lists,
Hmm.
actually, especially with the assault, because some biker units, if you hit them right, can go 20 inches on just a double move. But now if they can do 10 inches, they can go 10 inches, shoot everything in at you, and hit you all with a -1, of course. But I imagine that we're gonna see an increase in biker lists.
That's interesting. I like that. Okay. Devious Magister. Any thoughts on 3.3?
Yeah, got a couple. Um, I actually don't think the undead change is as huge of a buff as you think it is. But let me clarify that. Do you still have to roll for morale, or does it kick in automatically?
No, you roll for morale.
Okay. Yeah, in that case, that is a huge buff. I heard somewhere that you don't even roll anymore. It's just when it happens, it happens. That is, yeah, I'm getting flashbacks. Um, about the assault rule though, I don't know about that one. I don't understand why that's a rule in itself and not like a tag on an individual unit card, if that makes sense.
I
I
can
don't think
understand.
I don't think we necessarily needed another action for that, is all I'm getting at. And I'm kind of in agreement with War Boss Fitz, who went over this, and basically the way he put it is majority of the times, if you're gonna assault a unit, then you're doing it with a unit that already has a lean towards ranged or melee combat. So there's not really a point, at least with a lot of the armies I've seen. It's better to just kind of focus what you're good at and hammer that home rather than trying to divide and conquer and get a few more attacks in. But I haven't actually gotten to play any 3.3 yet. It's just surface thoughts from what I've read. So
Yeah,
I
this
think
is
that's a
all
fair
just
point.
guesses. And that's the great
yeah.
thing. Love to just put your guesses out and see if you're right or wrong. Yeah.
Yeah, I like the idea of having another action that allows for more, uh, just like more of this hybrid thing where you can bring good guns and bring good melee and feel like you're not wasting points. But the way the assault rule was rolled out and the way it's played so far in our Friday night games has just been, I don't know, it adds a lot of rules bloat. It adds a lot of weird complexity and things to keep track of, and it does very much feel pre-nerfed. I agree with that phrasing. And I'm also worried that Shaken is actually more punishing now than it was before. It just looks less punishing. And it's certainly feeling like that so far, but time will tell.
I can agree to that.
Yeah. 'Cause, yeah. Yeah. 'Cause, 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 yeah
and it's something that I have actually am struggling with myself because I've been playing a lot of these games on my channel. I've showed them, some I haven't, just because they're too brutal. How effective are shooter armies in OPR? It says the meta in that particular meta is orcs, saurians, and alien hives with heavy melee are dominant. And you know what I so this is my thing. I think that shooting armies, I would not look at be bringing a lot of 24-inch and 30-inch range. I think that 18-inch range with shooting armies is sort of the sweet spot. I think that shooting armies have to bring hand to hand. They just have to. They have got to have something, especially with the chain with cover and everything. Shooting is just and the fact that terrain naturally benefits that. Shooting armies really need to be close range. Think about the 12 to 18-inch range. I think, yeah, that's sort of my thought on it.
So here's a funny thing that's going on is that I'm an Alien Hives main, and my best thing that I do right now is I have a double squad of Hive Guard with the 30-inch lock-on AP4 guns, and I just get them on elevation as soon as possible with advanced tactics, and I just completely lock down these firing lanes, and it's just nuts. And so I think, and but maybe to your, so like I'd like to see armies. It's like, oh, this army has a shooting identity. Well, like let's see some really good guns like that. And I don't know why Alien Hives has some of the best guns either. I'd like to see Dow with that, but I think maybe to your point, what makes that work is while I'm doing that, I'm running assault grunts around everywhere and genes or soul snatchers, whatever, and like running cover for that. So maybe that is a point in the favor that shooting armies actually also need melee support.
It's genuinely hilarious that you described that particular setup because I do exactly the same thing with vanilla jackals. I'll get a squad of elites, double them up with missile launchers, and then plant them on a central piece of terrain, and then just rain threes all over the map with relentless. That's
Yeah.
one of the best strategies that I've ever figured out. But it only succeeds because I have great beast riders, and vultures all around causing absolute chaos. So I think a good shooter army benefits a lot more from some frontline chaff that can kind of abuse spacing, keep things from ambushing in behind on the good shooters, and just sort of control the board a little bit. Otherwise, you're going to get rushed down and eaten alive.
What's weird is that the Hive Guard are actually not. They're fine in melee too. So people melee them and they're still okay. So like, I don't know what to say about this.
I know Alien Hives genuinely upsets me because I look at Alien Hives next to Jackals and I'm just like, I shouldn't be playing this army. They literally do everything better. What am I doing with my life?
I mean, in my Alien Hives, I go the op. I'll talk about the next question is movement shenanigans, and that's all my Alien Hives list does is just movement shenanigans, just abusive movement shenanigans. But Ryan, what do you think about? How do you feel? So first of all, how do you feel about shooters and melee? Do you agree with the point, or yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
I think if you're going to play shooters, a shooty army, you need to either set up the board so that you can castle yourself and control the half of the board if you have 30-inch range, but by about turn 3 or 4 move in on those objectives, which can be a problem for shooters, especially because those objectives may be a little far from you. So I find that if I'm going to do a shooty list, I need to have some sort of other mix, whether it be having some assault grunts, or even making a fast shooty army, so that as you're coming in, I can get on the other side of the board and continue shooting at you. And then around turn 3 and 4, I have that range to move to grab those last minute objectives and contest them from you if I need. So bottom line, I think if you're going to do shooty, it's probably best to mix it with something else, whether it's assaulty, speed, ambushy. I don't think shooty alone can handle it.
Agreed.
Good idea. All right. So the next question is about how can you abuse movement in your strategies? And so I've been playing a lot of Soul Snatchers and I play Alien Hives. And I mean, that's what I do. I scout up 16 inches with my Soul Snatchers and I, through Strider, charge a 16-inch charge range. With Alien Hives, it's even worse because Alien Hives and Orcs both have a flying spell. And so, Alien Hives, I take whether it's the Ravening Beasts, and I can pheromones them up and then fly them. So you can't even chaff these guys. These are flying guys, basically a 22-inch threat range on turn one that are just in the backfield and just killing stuff. So I mean, Alien Hives and Soul Snatchers and Orcs. In my thoughts, when my custom armies, I have pretty much decided, and I did this before, to remove the flying spell. I think it's way too powerful. I think it is oppressive. And the thing is that movement shenanigans, they have two. One, they can hit people, but the other thing is they force your opponent to play so back that it's so difficult for your opponent to sort of get out of the rest of the field, or else just sacrifice key units on turn one. So I think that with, Soul Snatchers, Orcs, and Alien Hives, especially with the flying spell, all of those guys get charge boosts. They can get, well, Strider doesn't matter with flying. Yeah, I mean it's turn one, backfield, brutal, just yeah, roll over people. So that's what I do for movement abuse.
And my friend actually who runs Saurians, he was just even especially before the nerf to advanced tactics, he was just running max advanced tactics in his entire army, just all of the time. And so I actually think logistically it's a little weird because you constantly have to be recalculating as the opponent, like, well, what actually is the threat range on these things? And if you make a mistake, it's very, very bad.
Yeah, honestly, given a couple of the lists I've seen, I don't think that additional movement is really good for the game because it gives a lot of unpredictability, in my opinion. And I guess it's kind of a good thing and a bad thing. I've seen some pretty horrific movement abuse. I saw one dude in that league that I was playing run a plague list with a maxed out avatar of plague that he had two separate heroes essentially slingshotting this monstrosity across the field in one turn. And that was his whole thing. It was one giant nasty pinball. And that's really scary. I don't think that's necessarily balanced either.
Yeah, I go back and forth about whether to just ban the movement spells too. At
Yeah,
least
it's
flying
very
spells.
strong.
Flying should. I just think it's if I had my druthers, no army would have a flying buff.
I mean, it's not
just
necessarily the flying in particular, it's the ability to like move another unit for free. Whatever it is, like Marshall something, I think.
Advanced tactics, you mean?
yeah,
There we go.
all the
Thank you.
different the different names of it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, how about this one? This is another one. So how can you abuse or counter activation spam? So can someone real fast, can someone explain what activation spam is so that maybe this is a bit of a kind of a top, high level competitive term? Can someone just give a quick definition of what activation spam is? So
I believe you're referring to having so many units that I can basically just out activate you so that you activate first. You're done activating first, and I'll have some leftover units that I can outpace you, is what I'm hearing. Is that right?
yeah, yeah.
I would say that when I go against activation spam units, for the most part, they are MSU armies, so multiple small unit types. So each man, in my experience, that is. So it's going to be 5-man units or sometimes 10-man low defense units. I find the best way to activate them is to simply put, eliminate them
Yep.
early on. And the best way for that I can do that is to carry units with 2 types of weapons, so that I can focus on 2 different units at a time, until they dwindle down. And usually by about turn 3 or 4, all of his units are below half strength and will start failing morale, or I would have eliminated so many of his units that his activation spam is null at that point.
Yeah. Another good strategy for activation spam is ambush. A lot of
Mhm.
activation spams lists are they're going to have a lot of cheap units, but going to have one really powerful unit to slingshot. So what you do is you have a really powerful unit that ambushes in. You know you're going first the next turn. You ambush
Mhm.
in, you hit that key unit. Then all he has is just a whole bunch, like you said, a whole bunch of these sort of dink units that can't really hurt anything. So
Exactly.
good ambush
Yeah.
unit can do that.
I mean,
And for the record, I think it's valuable to have lists that can have lots of activations, and that's good for that list. And then also have lists where there's very few activations, like the Adeptus Custodes or whatever, and make that also viable. I'd like to see both be viable options.
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
I mean, he essentially described my strategy of how to lock down activation spam as I like to kind of cut up the enemy army into manageable pieces through positioning and then just take chunks out of them one at a time. So what I'll usually do is I like to put my opponent in a position where they have impossible choices. So I'll have 2 really high output units targeting 2 of their very important elites or whatever their ace in the hole is. Then whichever one they activate first, I'll eat the other one before it can get off whatever its move is. But that takes a lot of finesse to get off. And we were talking about terrain earlier. That doesn't always kind of facilitate that strategy. So it's a finicky thing, but I think it's doable on both sides of the equation. And I kind of agree. There needs to be some armies that are basically hordes. Those are a lot of fun.
Yeah, I think that once you know how to deal with activation spam, it's not as powerful. I think some of new players who get activation spammed at first think it's just broken. But if
Yeah.
you once you sort of see how it works, you can be like, and you can tailor. The thing is, and that's the great thing about OPR, you have to tailor a list. If you're going to go elites, you need to be able to, like Magister, and we're all saying, you have to, that has to be in the list planning phase where you have to say, okay, if I'm going to face the activation spam list, I know how to, I've got some tools to deal with it. Another question, I haven't had this problem myself. Someone was acting about Deadly and Blast 6 being extremely swingy. When do you want them in your army and when you don't? I'm not a big fan of Blast or Deadly 6 myself. Um, and so I guess I don't like playing, especially with Deadly 6. Much prefer to have Deadly 3. Um, has anyone just I don't know. I don't play him. Maybe I should. Is this a particular problem that anyone has faced here?
I've
Um,
seen the sixes in practice.
uh,
During the tournament, I faced a Dow list that had 2 stealth suits. One had Blast 6, the other had Deadly 6. Um, the only reason I won that match was because the Deadly 6 hit my Great Beast, but I rolled a 6 on the defense and just ate it. That was the only turn they got an activation on, as we might expect.
yeah.
But I can kind of see the argument on both sides. Like when it goes off, it's great. When it doesn't, it feels awful. And in my mind, that's kind of identical to the way spells work. I'm not a big fan of spells and magic. And it kind of feels like they're speaking on the same terms with the sixes. I don't know though. I haven't had as much experience as probably y'all have with it.
Well, I think this question came out of my group, and the concern we had is that Blast 6 and Deadly 6 tend to be on these 4 quality tank profiles, which means you're doing this coin flip thing. And no matter what happens, somebody feels really, really bad, right? So if you whiff on your coin flip, that's a 1/4 activation on this guy you spent, 700 points on. And if you hit and your opponent just like, boop, now he just lost an entire unit. So it's like, it's so swingy from whoever's perspective you look at it. And we found that we stopped playing with those units because the risk reward's too high to be seriously competitive.
Consistency is king.
That's how I feel. I'd never played with them before.
I used to run the harpoon launcher on the Great Beast when I first started, and it was fantastic when it landed, but it only landed half of the time. And as we know, on a coin flip, you're always going to get what you don't want when you need it to hit.
Of course.
All right. So good questions. We got our last one for the night. So we got a question about asking. They'd love to hear about terrain, how much, what type, special rules. Now, I think that 3.3 and 3.2 have generally gotten better about giving some better suggestions about this. What I think, Ryan, I want you to sort of talk because we come from Kings of War, and one
Yep.
of the things that I learned in Kings of War is terrain placement is part of the game in Kings of War. And you
Yep.
actually learn that actually how you place terrain is a huge tactical decision. It's actually a reason that I've
Yep.
always been a big fan of. It takes extra time in tournaments, but as much as possible, I always like to give the two generals the choice. I really, as much as possible, would try to avoid preset terrain because there's actually a lot of tactical depth that goes into terrain placements.
Yeah.
Yeah, but what do you think about that, Ryan?
No, I think that, in my tournaments, I implement, taking turns placing terrains, taking turns placing terrain, and this is before objectives are placed, and then after that you pick sides, and I think this helps balance out the game. Some pieces of terrain are better for some armies and units than others. For example, the way I like to play my forests is that they are difficult and cover, but they're also you cannot see through the forest.
Yeah.
You can only see in or out of, and I don't see enough people playing that way. And that can make armies where when I play against jackals, I find that they have a lot of abilities around terrain. That yeah. And so there's, in my army crafting theory, I think there are some armies that are all about terrain and the way that they can move through terrain and interact, and people just don't play them like that, and so they kind of stop playing that army. But if you know what you're doing around that terrain, you can really kick butt. Same thing for a salty versus shooty. If I'm playing a salty army and I'm facing a shooty, the way I place terrain may be so that I have more open fields to get across the other side and start pounding on you, or even some line of sight blocking terrain so that I can hide in between as I'm moving forward. And if I'm playing shooty versus a salty, obviously I want to have a lot of elevated terrain so I can get on and see your guys coming at me, as well as a lot of difficult terrain so that it's taking time for you to get inside. Another thing, I know I'm rambling here, but another tactic that I find that works very well for jackals is placing the objectives in difficult terrain. Because for the most part, I think a lot of your units have Strider.
Every single one of
So
them.
yes, so it only takes you 12 inches to get into that objective versus a unit of Battle Brothers that has to take 2 activations to get inside. That really makes or breaks games.
You just
and
figured
the
out how I
opposite.
win most of my games.
And that's
yeah. I play my Battle Brothers with a lot of Pathfinders, and that's exactly how, because I play Raven Guard, or play them as Raven Guard, or what I call I call them the Crow Brothers, but that's how I do it. I'll place an objective in some difficult terrain, and by turn 3 or 4, you have no chance of grabbing it. I can throw a unit of Pathfinders or even a unit of Assault Brothers on it, no problem.
Yeah, one of the best things this is I think what makes coming from Kings of War, and I played Ryne. Ryne's a really good player. I fancy myself to be a good player too, coming out of the Kings of War scene. And it's because Kings of War really stretches about objectives, and you will lose the game if you want to get better at OPR, especially Grimdark. You got to learn how to place terrain, and you've got to learn how to place objectives. The
Yep.
opposite, if you don't have a lot of Strider in your army, you need every one of your objectives in open terrain.
Yep.
You need to sort of balance that. That's a thing that I think some of the newer plays, if you want to get better at you want to get better at Grimdark Future, it's all about the terrain placement, understanding your strengths and weaknesses. Do you want to squish those objective markers together? Do you want to spread them out in difficult terrain, out of difficult terrain, in a shooting lane, behind things? All because here's the thing I always say, you should, when you start a game, you should go into it from before you even set a model down. Okay, these are the objectives I'm going after, and this is what I'm going to do.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
In that tournament when you came up, I won a game because of terrain. I was playing a change demon list, and so I had a lot of flying. And the way I placed the objective, the mission we played, the objective was right in the middle. And so I knew that the objective would be in the middle. So when I placed terrain, I placed dangerous terrain right in the middle. And so I could ignore with flying the effects of dangerous terrain. I don't know if they do it on 3.0, but at the time I was able to ignore the effects of dangerous terrain and claim that objective. And every time he tried to get into the dangerous terrain, a lot of his guys would die from the dangerous terrain test. And so, yeah, knowing how to play that terrain can make or break you in terms of it really separates the good players from I should say the inexperienced players.
Yeah.
This is really
Yes, sir.
interesting because for just out of pure logistical issues, we just pre-built all the maps. And then we started pre-building all the maps with the objectives on them. And so when you showed up at one of our tournaments, you had to really stare at the table edge and decide what you wanted to do. We also did a thing where you would roll off and the winner didn't have to go first and pick the table edge. The winner got to pick the table edge, and the other player got to go first. So maybe that evolved out of our pre-placing all the objectives and terrain. But I want to know, do you guys think that is actually just losing a massive dimension of the game if we're playing this way?
I agree. I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I know it's something that I think that you can find a halfway balance, because I think there is a logistical issue about having everyone. Maybe it's half the terrain. Like maybe some pieces are there or we're allowed it. I think that there can be some happy mediums where maybe you don't get to place all the terrain, but maybe it's some. But I know that placing your own objectives and placing terrain, this is only a 4-turn game. You've got
You're practically playing before the game starts.
Yeah, you are playing before the game starts. So and it's I'll tell you, like, and this came out of Kings of War. When I played Kings of War, I would be this person that I'm using my time clock on a piece of terrain. I got my time's going, and I'm just like, I'm using time on that terrain. Yeah. So yeah.
How many objectives do you guys play with?
We usually roll for them.
I do the D3+2. Yeah.
If
Yeah.
I play what's the standard mission? If I do the basic mission, I do all the objectives. So all 5, I think it's all 5 of them.
Yeah.
But when I do my tournaments, normally what I do 6 rounds, and every single round is a different mission from those 6 basic missions there.
Well, guys, we'd love to keep you guys on all night, but I know, unfortunately, all of us have lives other than gaming. I really appreciate each one of you coming on. Would love to have you back on. Yeah, Ryne, D3vious, Magister, thank you so much. Just the last word for each of you. Ryne, any last words?
No, I think we said, I think I said everything here.
Thanks so much, Ryne. D3vious.
Read your tooltips, kids. They save lives.
Thank you so much. Magister.
Hey, thanks for having us on. I really appreciate it. And I did want to say we've really enjoyed playing with command points, and I'd love to talk more about that sometime.
We'd love to have, well, I would hope all of you guys can come back on, because I think, to me, this is just the start of a conversation. Thank you all so much. Till next time.
Thank you, guys.